Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Hadley. I'm the president of Kite Hill. I'm not the founder, but I am the president of Kite Hill, and I'm excited to be here today. Most people don't give me microphones because I'm a loud person. So if I get too loud, just let me know. We're the last panel, and I'm glad you're still here. We're the only thing keeping you between now and happy hour, but I think you will find that it is worth it. So thank you for staying. And now each of our panelists will introduce themselves.
There we go. I'm Annie Scranton. I'm the founder and president of Pace Public Relations. We've been in business for 10 years. For 8 years prior to that, I was a TV news producer, and I worked at most of the major networks like CNN and MSNBC and the Today Show. And now our client base is very wide-ranging. We focus on traditional media relations, definitely with a strong capability in booking our clients on television.
Hey everybody, I'm Christina Stokes. I'm the Vice President and Director of Talent Acquisition at Rubenstein, the strategic communications firm. My career has been very unusual because nobody really starts out wanting to be a recruiter. It's something that mostly just happens to people, and I happened to be good at it. So I'm happy to share some of my knowledge with you today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Netta Jenkins. I'm Vice President of Global Inclusion for Mosaic Group and Ask Applications. I really focus on equity. So a lot of times, many organizations talk about diversity and inclusion, which is key, but equity is about opportunity and access for those that have not had access to technology, and making sure that they are presented with that opportunity. So we'll definitely dive into that a bit more, and I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. So we, in the PR industry, we're pretty unique in that we are in an industry dominated by women. So 75% of people in the PR industry are women, yet when it comes to leadership roles, 75% are men. So this is a pretty big disparity. Today we're going to talk about this gender gap at the leadership level, as well as addressing pay inequality, power, and respect in the workplace for women and gender non-binary individuals. So would anyone like to share a moment in their career when you experienced gender bias?
Sure. So I will actually give an example of my mom's experience. Right now, she's actually going to court for this discrimination case, unfortunately. But a lot of people don't know that it is okay to actually share your salary information, if you want to, of course. It's also very taboo, right? And so she's a nurse, and she works in the hospital. And a colleague of hers, who's a white male, much younger than her, had shared his salary. They both work they have the same role, but he has been with the organization only for about 2 years. Meanwhile, she was with the organization for about 18 plus years. He shared his salary, and he was making significantly more than she was making. Had he not shared, she would have never known, right? So it was definitely a blessing that he did share this information. But I think when we start talking about gender bias, if she had never learned of that information, she wouldn't have been able to take action. And I think, many women, unfortunately, end up with these types of experiences. We may not hear about them often, but it is happening. And so for me, being in the diversity, inclusion, equity world, and then my mom telling me, hey, this was my experience, I'm like, oh God, right? How can I help you to make sure that we can better this and take action? So that's the experience.
I have a specific to myself scenario to share. I came into a position once upon a time where I replaced a white male in my role, doing the same job, leading talent acquisition, and came to find out while I was in the position already that I was earning significantly less than he had been. Again, same responsibilities, same seniority, and this was highly problematic for me to discover, and I addressed it with my employers at the time, but unfortunately, they saw fit to only provide a $2,000 salary increase when I brought this to their attention. Suffice to say, I am no longer there. So sometimes you have to make very hard decisions for yourself in your career, and you have to voice the things that you come across when you do, and try to steer the ship if possible. But it's not always possible. But that was a very direct, specific example that I came across in my career.
I had a client recently tell me I was too emotional. So I think probably that was, I don't know if I was a man, if they...
Trigger.
I'm not sure, but I just moved on and said, well, sorry, I care.
So two of you mentioned pay, the pay inequity piece. What do you see as the biggest reason for gender disparities in the industry?
I think, what we tend to do is we definitely group women in one box, and we have to kind of break that down into intersectionality, right? When we start looking at what women of color are making or how fast they're moving within the organization, it's very, very different from what white women are making or Latinx women are making, right? Even if we start looking at venture capital, right? Black women make 0.2 in terms of venture capital. Latinx women make 0.1% in terms of venture capital, and white women make 2.2%. Now, none of those numbers are good, but we really have to start breaking that down and looking at how we can support each group from a different lens, because we all need different types of support.
I think a lot of that could be addressed also by just looking at your hiring process, even before you come into a role. Who's on the panel that's interviewing your candidates? Is there always a woman represented on an interview panel? And you can look at this throughout any of your organizations, be you in a hiring capacity or not. There should always be a woman on the panel if possible, which why wouldn't it be? There should always be a person of color on the panel as well. And you want to see many different people represented and participating in these hiring decisions, because then you're addressing this issue up front even before you're in an organization, even before the person has started working for your company. And I think that's where a lot of fairness starts to come into play when all these different kinds of people are making those decisions.
I think just for me, running a small business, whether I'm trying to hire a freelancer or full-time, always the male candidates who I'm talking to ask for more money, sometimes astronomically more so, and they don't get hired, but they're not afraid to ask for it. And I think women are definitely getting better about asking for more and knowing your value and your worth, but it's something that I certainly still see firsthand.
They're also, men are also more likely to apply for positions where they don't check all the boxes. Sometimes where they don't check any of the boxes. It's really, really fascinating. But we were talking about that too, because I believe you had some advice for
I did.
women in that process.
I mean, in any position that I post, I'm always the first one to have eyes on the application coming in, and I noticed exactly what she said, where a lot of male candidates will not check all the boxes, or any, a lot of the time, and a lot of women candidates won't apply at all if they don't. So my advice to the room is, if you check the majority of those boxes as far as key responsibilities and experience, apply for the job, and take that shot, because your peers on the other side of the room, they're doing that. So you should always try for it if you can, and I see it's just not happening, unfortunately.
So let's talk about the pay inequity piece again a little bit more, because we were talking right before this panel about how women are asking for more money now far more often. I know, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, the stat was that 90% of men negotiate their salaries and 90% of women don't. So the question kind of came to, are we at fault? Are women at fault and at least partially at fault for the pay gap? But Netta actually mentioned we're asking far more and for more money. But do either of you, and Christina, do you have thoughts on that, on negotiating?
I think it's important to be aware of where your industry is. So there are many resources available. Just research a little bit. That's all it takes, a couple of minutes. Even though sites like Glassdoor provide average salary ranges, it is self-reported information, so it's not completely accurate, but it will get you close to where you should be based on title and years of experience. So when you go into these conversations, or when you're presented with an offer, give or take where you should be, and you can negotiate for that, and you should. And you shouldn't. It's kind of just breaking those chains away and being in the position to go ahead and ask for it. If you're getting the offer, they're interested in you, so negotiate when you have the opportunity to do so for sure.
And what's very interesting is many of us know our value, but we get so nervous when we have to ask, right, for more money. It's just a very nerve-wracking thing. And so I always tell people, find that friend that just boosts your ego. Like, girl, you are amazing. You got it. Find that person that can tell you, no, Melanie, go for it, get that $1,000 more, whatever it is, because that'll definitely motivate you. And for men in the room too, definitely motivate the women too. If they're like, well, I don't have this, because I have a lot of friends that do this. Well, I don't have this, that, the other. Make sure you're pushing them as well and supporting them and saying, listen, I don't check all the boxes, but I would apply, right? So it's really about us continuously empowering each other.
And I think too, it's coming into the meeting armed with some real stats and information of how you have provided value for your company and for your clients and for your employer. If you come in and you say, well, I was running this account and they got this, and this hit, and they signed another year contract and blah, 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 like, that's, as an employer and someone who's in charge of salaries and giving people raises, that would certainly make me much more inclined to see in black and white the real work that you've done. So I think just taking a few minutes to kind of put that together would certainly be helpful.
Great. So a report in 2019, earlier this year, by the Institute of Public Relations and KPMG, called Minding the Gap, used focus groups to identify some of the reasons why the male-female leadership gap persists in the PR industry. So in these focus groups, there were a lot of quotes, a lot of quotable quotes. You might want to look it up if you're interested in finding some of those. But a few of them got my attention, so I'm going to read some of the quotes and ask some follow-up questions there. One woman said, I know I grew one of the biggest accounts we had, and then all of a sudden, everyone was starting to take notice. And then my boss wanted to go out and golf with my client, and I was not invited because I was not the lead person. So how does sexism play a role in gender disparity?
I mean, that's awful, and I think that boss is really doing a disservice to his client, to his employee, and to his company, and to the bottom line ultimately, because employers and bosses and managers should be using their position of power to help raise up people within the company and not shut them down because they have an ego or they want to try to take the moment of glory for himself. But I think unfortunately sexism is real. It's out there, just like racism is, just like all these things that make people uncomfortable, but it's still happening. And so I think first we just need to be aware that it's out there, and when an instance like that happens, speak up, and that's speak up to your boss, speak up to HR, speak up to other colleagues, speak up to your client. I mean, if you're really responsible in making that account grow and flourish, I think everybody should take ownership in that and address it in a respectful way, but certainly to address it.
And to that point, I mean, you need to advocate for yourself as much as possible, but leadership also, you have to advocate for your people. So be aware of these things when you see them happening. And like you said, you really do have to just say something in order to start to steer the ship in the right way. Otherwise, nothing will ever change.
Yeah, sometimes they're just unaware. It's just how it was done in the past. So another quote, the problems women face as regards to balancing work and family was also mentioned. One woman said, I actually had to make the choice whether to keep having children or to continue with my job. So it's still a big challenge. What are we as an industry doing to overcome this?
I can speak to that from a couple of different lenses. I'm a working mom. I have a 4-year-old at home who is unforgiving. But even from the hiring process early on, when you're looking at what your organization offers around benefits and flexibility and work-life balance and paternal leave, not just for the moms, but for the dads too, like what do these things look like? And when you're going into an organization, what are you looking for from your company? And you have to figure out what's important to you. I think those are just some things that come to mind immediately, at least.
Yeah, I could speak a little to that. So I have a 6-year-old and a 5-month-old. Boy, just have to take it in for a second.
It.
But no, they are amazing. And one of the key things is for my organization, we have unlimited PTO, which is amazing, but of course that's based on manager discretion. So I think it's really important to build those relationships with your manager, gain some understanding on kind of their world, understanding what their world looks like, if there's any similarities, and being a little vulnerable and open with your situation. And for me, I was able to be very vulnerable with my manager and explain my situation. She's like, well, Netta, I went through the same thing and I understand. So last week I had to speak in California, and I told her, I said, I have mommy guilt and I really want to bring my child with me to California. And she's like, I'm in full support of that. So it's, again, I guess this goes for leaders, really building that relationship with the folks on your team, getting to understand their situation, being a bit empathetic, and really understanding. I think that's the key.
I think also as a working mom and having several members of my team who are working moms too, really the bottom line is still, if you're going to produce and get me good results, but you need to work from home sometimes, or you need to be flexible in your hours or whatever, I don't really care if I still don't have to worry about the thing that you're supposed to be running and managing. And so I think we're a small company. I think with bigger companies, there's obviously more bureaucracy and internal politics and things you have to wade through and navigate. But if you can prove that you're still getting the job done in whatever way you can, I have to believe that employers would take that, as one of the most important factors.
Okay, last quote. I always say to my husband, I wish I had gray hair because I think I'd have the job I really think I'm qualified for. So women feel pressured by society to look young, yet in the workplace, we aren't always taken as seriously if we don't look the age of our role. So how can we overcome this?
Yeah, this is actually very interesting because, again, I spoke in California, last week, and I was the youngest in the room. And what I tend to see is definitely as a young Black woman in a VP executive level position, people are like, well, how did you get that position, Netta? I worked my way up, right? I'm worth that. And so it's just very, very interesting being young and being in that type of position and people sort of having that mindset. And I think being open and having that conversation, so when people do ask me that question, I do tell them about my experience. I validate that as well. And then I ask them about their experience level too. So I think that, those are some important things to do.
I can relate to Netta on this big time. I'm definitely the youngest person in senior leadership at Rubenstein around the table, and I'm in with the C-suite all the time, making decisions around hiring and staffing, and that will shape the direction of the company going forward. And that's a huge responsibility. So be nice to your talent acquisition people. There's my plug of the day. But I experience that all the time, much more earlier on in my career, and I've been able to confront it, and I've had really great mentorship along the way, which has helped me to have tough conversations and be comfortable in that role.
We're a young company. I'm the oldest one of the team. I'm 39. I have a couple of staff members who didn't know who Pearl Jam was, which was really upsetting and to me. But I think, to the question of age, play to your strengths, a lot of our clients like that we're a young firm because we know how to do social media and we are up on all the streaming networks and things like that. And, as you get older, you obviously have more experience to help command a room or to just bring that confidence into a new client meeting or whatever. So I think just always playing to your strengths, no matter what age, is going to be your biggest asset.
Great. That's great advice. So Netta, about your position. So let's talk about that a little bit. According to Indeed, in 2018, diversity and inclusion postings were up 18% year over year, and 35% higher than levels from 2 years past. That same year, another study found that 47% of companies in the S&P 500 index have a chief diversity officer or someone of the equivalent. So what inspired you to enter this career, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh my goodness. So being an activist really stemmed from a very young age. I grew up in Johnston, Rhode Island. My mom and dad are from Liberia, and so I don't know how they migrated or why, all the way to small Rhode Island. But anyway, when we when they settled there, we did face a lot of discrimination. And one of the moments, actually 2 moments I'll never forget, is the neighbor walking up to my mom. I was about 7 years old, and she said, "Blacks don't belong in my neighborhood," to my mom's face. And I remember standing there, not saying anything, but that really being unsettling for me, but also not like taking it fully in until I was older. The next experience was when the police officer stopped us in our driveway. And my mom's like, he's like, "Ma'am, are you lost?" My mom's like, "No, we're on our land." And then my mom turned to me and she said, "Well, these are just some of the things we may experience." And I remember thinking like, no, this has to change. So fast forward, I go to middle school, and not everyone was saying racial slurs, but there were a few that said, "Hey, I heard people from Africa have tails, climb trees, so can you climb a tree?" And I remember going back home and crying about it to my mom. And my mom saying one thing to me that was so pivotal that I'll never forget in my life. She said, "I didn't bring you on this earth to cry about things. I brought you on this earth to create change." And when she said that, that was the most pivotal thing I've ever heard in my life and has gotten me to where I am, to be frank, today. And so I've always been an advocate for women, people of color, LGBTQ, anyone that was from a marginalized group. Heck, I was even an advocate for men, right? Because I had advocates that were men as well. And so that's something that I definitely push for every single day. While I was in college, I started my own company, and it was a casting company to really provide a safe space for women to model and act and not be harassed. So I was casting for New York Fashion Week and a lot of different reality shows and all of that. And so I've always been about creating safe spaces, and here I am now within the technology industry doing the same exact thing. So that's how it started.
That's great. What have been some of the challenges along the way?
Challenges. I think whenever you're an activist and you're trying to create change, not everyone's going to be on that bandwagon. And so I think the most challenging thing for me, especially being a passionate person, is seeing a few people that aren't really on that bandwagon or wanting to help me create change. Or when I'm talking about different initiatives, not seeing them at those events. Focused on that, or maybe some of the executives not at those events and really pressing hard to create change can be very challenging for me. So I'd say that's the biggest thing, but it really takes a village to create change.
So let's talk about mentorship a little bit. How has mentorship helped each of you in your careers?
I think it's helped me by some mentors have given me some very tactical, practical advice when I was starting my business. Probably the best piece of advice I got was, don't spend a lot of money at first, go slow, which it sounds like so basic, but what's the statistic? Like 90% of startups fail in the first year or whatever, and I think that's probably part of it. So when I was starting my company, I had no idea how to form an S corp, or how do I do payroll for my staff. And so just having folks within my network who were smarter than I was in those areas to rely on was absolutely of critical importance. And then I think just along the way, not necessarily mentors, but just I was lucky enough in TV to have a lot of very strong, seasoned, well-respected female bosses and executive producers. And I think just seeing how they carried themselves and how they conducted themselves with their staff and with their bosses was something I always wanted to emulate.
I've definitely been lucky in that way as well, where I've worked in organizations that have very strong female leadership who have worked directly with me and functioned as mentors, and also to kind of show me the ropes of the business and what I'm doing and how I should do it. And definitely I've been able to emulate them through my work over the course of my career. So finding those mentors is not always the easiest thing. Sometimes it happens fluidly, sometimes it doesn't. So I would always recommend to never stop networking and getting to know people in your business. There's so many places where women can go and other people to find groups of folks doing the same thing in your line of work or doing what you want to be doing. So you just have to find those people and have those conversations, and then the sky's the limit.
I would say my first mentor was actually a white man, and he helped me so much. How I started off was just by asking him so many questions. I was just really impressed with, at that time I was recruiting, and I was really impressed at how he was closing deals, and I'm like, I want to learn everything from you. And so he started teaching me the way. One of the things that I want to also say is I think there is a difference between mentors and sponsors, right? And so I think the people that have inspired me the most within my career have been sponsors, people that are able to talk about you when you're not in the room, right? That's what really helps to uplift you and get you to the next level. And of course, I thank my mentors too, right, for guiding me, but sponsors presenting me and having me talk and speak to different executives, C-level folks, to get me to the space that I need to be in my career has been truly instrumental. And I can honestly say that men have definitely played a tremendous role in that.
Great. From the same study I mentioned earlier, one of the key findings is that there's a positive shift in women helping women. There's also an important shift of men helping women as well. Do you see, how do you all see women helping women in the industry?
I mean, I think it is happening for sure. I definitely feel like when I go to different networking events, just in a very general sense, the women I meet are just much more open, and there's a lot more just open communication about different issues. How much do you charge? You know, how do you do your contracts? What is, you know, how do you handle certain things? Because I think there is enough business to go around where you don't have to be so territorial over every single aspect. Within my company, we spend a lot of time trying to groom our younger employees, our younger female employees, and to just teach and lead by example. And so I do think that's happening on a bigger scale.
I think also to that point, not only just the focus on junior employees, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, providing continued education and development within your organization for women that are later in their career, 20 years, 30 years down the line, that's crucial. And I don't see a lot of organizations providing those opportunities outside of just like grooming the people that are just getting started or mid-level. So I think that's something that a lot of places could put more emphasis on for sure too.
I'll keep it all real, right? I think there's a lot of support. Women come together at conferences. We do such a great job at that, supporting each other. But I think sometimes in the workplace, it can be a little tough, right? It can be a little catty. And there are queen bees, right? Not wanting to take your spot. And I love what you said, because I think there definitely needs to be more programs in support of women growing and exponentially. One of the programs that I'm going to be working on for next year, it's called It's Her Turn. So really looking at succession planning, who's in the pipeline, who wants to move up to a C-level position or a leadership position? How can we make sure that they are supported? How can we make sure that they're given the resources, that they're giving learning and development opportunities to get to the level that they're looking to get at? And I think that's really important.
One more thing, there was something really cool that we did at Rubenstein when I first came to the organization, and we do it every year now during International Women's Month. We have 5 generations of people working at the firm, which is amazing. So some people have been there for over 40 years, some are just starting after graduating college. And we put together a series of different panels featuring our female leadership at the firm that gave a lot of the junior and mid-level staff and even other senior leaders at the agency time in the room to hear the stories of these women that are driving the organization forward. And that was so cool and exciting for the staffers that don't always get face time with those senior-most people in the organization. So finding a way to showcase your senior leadership as well is just as important as finding opportunities to give a thumbs up to your up-and-comers as well.
Christina, how are you investing in women, people of color, LGBT, to ensure that they also get the resources they need to grow in their careers?
I think a lot of that, the way we're structuring our DEI initiatives and just programs for staff at all levels at Rubenstein right now, is just making sure that first and foremost, people are comfortable with being able to come forward to share any concerns they have or ideas that they have. We're building out a diversity council at the firm. So like Netta was saying before, everybody needs different kinds of support. So pinpointing what those things are for the different factions of our staff and finding ways to provide them what they need. And a lot of that comes, we've been doing focus groups with our staff and one-on-one interviews with our staff and workshopping and just constantly having conversations to see how we can provide support for people at all levels, whether regardless of gender, regardless of race, but making sure that everybody is welcome, everybody is getting acknowledgement, and everyone's getting professional development opportunities. So the beginning of it for us has been having the conversations, and they're not always easy conversations to have because issues always come forward, that people maybe they didn't have the platform to speak, but now they do, and some of the things are not always easy to hear. So being open and perceptive to the things that you're hearing and identifying the trends and just continuing to have those conversations and making sure people are on board from the top all the way down, and in an organization that's been around for a really long time, that's challenging. Your roots are set in stone in some ways, but chipping away at that has been really exciting at my firm currently.
Great. When we talk about unconscious bias, we're not just talking about, men aren't the problem with gender inequality. A lot of women have unconscious bias for women. What are some tools? How do you work to create awareness in your organizations of this unconscious bias that exists?
Yeah, what we like to do is we like to break down the gaps and the barriers. So I think a lot of organizations believe in employee resource groups. Does everyone know what an employee resource group is here? Okay, so many organizations have them. They've had them for years, and so there's a women's group, LGBTQ group, people of color, differently abled. And when I had first joined and started in this role, what I immediately saw was the disconnect between the groups, right? We weren't learning from each other. We weren't sharing. Women were for women. People of color were for people of color. LGBTQ is for LGBTQ, and that was it. And so the leaders of those groups, I had to sit down and have a conversation with them and sort of challenge the idea of how are we continuously learning from each other? How are we sharing content if we're in these separate groups? And so we created one group called Diversity Ambassadors, and we have a Slack channel as well. So we're literally having these conversations every single day and challenging one another on different topics. So we're bringing up topics around parenting. Another key thing for me was, how do I bring men on board? How do I get them interested, right, if we're having a women-focused conversation? And again, having that one group with every single person in the organization a part of it really empowered men too to start learning about some of these things, taking action, wanting to be allies, wanting to be sponsors and mentors. So I think that was, definitely very key.
Definitely. I see a lot of men in the crowd right now, so I'm really happy about that because I personally think that men have a lot of power to make a big change with this as we look at racism or sexism or homophobia, like all of those issues didn't really change in society until folks on the outside really started to step up and make noise. So now let's talk about recruitment a little bit. With recruitment efforts, Christina, how do you think language used in job descriptions affects folks who submit their resumes?
Well, for the people who actually read job descriptions, thank you to those people out there in the crowd today. Their language plays a huge part in who might apply to a job. Specifically, if women are looking at a job description, there are a lot of free tools. You can just Google them they're free, and you can upload your job description, and it will scan it for you and provide different language choices for terms that might skew heavily towards a man being more receptive to the language or a woman, and they make it a little more gender neutral. And that actually will enhance your applicant experience overall, and you'll see an influx of more applications coming through when you're able to do that. So I highly recommend looking up some of those free tools if putting out job descriptions is something that any of you do or participate in as leaders in your companies. Language, huge.
I was just signaled that we have 5 minutes left. Am I supposed to leave time for people to ask questions? Nah, okay, maybe? Okay, so raise your hand if you have a question. And I have another one actually for, you see one? Yeah. Okay. What do we do? Do we walk around with a mic? Somebody want, there we go. We have someone.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm Chelsea Lynn Rudder. I'm Director of Communications for the Alzheimer's Association in New York City. I wanted to go back to the issue of pay equity, especially when it comes to women being assertive, because it always strikes me that the issue of women being assertive also smacks up against the fact that as sort of stereotypical Americans, we're not encouraged to discuss money and salary. And so there's sort of like a double bind in terms of it being difficult for women to lean in and assert themselves when it comes to pay equity. I also just wanted to make one quick comment. I'm a relatively new manager, and something that came to my attention recently is that in New York State, depending upon your county, there is a minimum salary for salaried employees, full-time exempt employees, which is something I didn't know. I thought of a minimum wage as something for hourly employees. And especially in a female-dominated field like public relations, that's important knowledge because people will try to lower the salaries that they give to people, especially entry-level employees. So I just wanted to mention that and see what you thought in terms of techniques or tactics for really speaking up for the salaries we deserve.
I just think you have to get the courage to do it, number one, I think, but it's also like we're in PR, like we're supposed to be able to read certain cues, you know, and know how to work a reporter to get the story that we want. And really it's all about just connecting, I think, with your HR manager, with your boss, and being as real and authentic to yourself as possible. I don't think it will necessarily be to your benefit to say, well, I asked around and I know what every other person here is making. I mean, you could if there was like a big disparity there, but I think it just always comes down to advocating for yourself for the value that you bring to the company. And if you can put that in the context of dollars and cents or hours worked or, you know, examples of you relating to other people in the firm, I think that's your best bet. But I hear you, and I think we are in this sort of weird bind, you know, where it's not easy, and it kind of sucks. Like the pressure's on us, you know, to go out and do it. But I think if we all collectively keep doing it and moving forward, then hopefully the dynamic will change and become easier all around.
And it's not always the case with a lot of organizations where some places they provide a lot of transparency as to what the salary ranges are at different levels, and in a lot of places they don't provide anything like that. And I find that the further along in your career you are, those brackets widen and broaden based on your years of work experience, your years in PR specifically, if you have the industry experience for the kind of PR you're doing. Like it breaks down to so many different ways. So a lot of it is research, a lot of it is speaking up for yourself. There are a lot of factors to take into consideration. And I wish there was just more transparency from organizations to their staff around what, you know, those progressions might look like so that you can track out what your path should be. But that's just, you know, that comes a little bit at a time. So for now, I mean, speak up.
And what I'll add to that is just saying knowing your value is the most important thing or most important gift you can give to yourself. And so if you're at a company or you're in the recruiting process and you know that they're not going to offer you the amount that you deserve, then that's not the place for you, right? Because how are they going to treat you down the line? So really look out for, you know, I think you guys definitely gave some key tips. Definitely look out for some of those trends in the beginning.
We have another question in the middle. Oh, over here. Got it.
Yeah, hi. So I think this is a really important topic, but I think it's important that we be really frank about this. There's a danger of kind of blaming the victim here a little bit. And I think all the advice that you're giving is really good, but I want to suggest something to everybody in this room, because some of the women in this room are going to be leading corporate communications functions for big companies in the future, or you're going to be leading at an agency. We got to stop with tolerating these behaviors, and the only way it's really going to change is if we have salary transparency. It's the only way it's going to change. So what I would suggest is to all of you who are going to be the future generation, if you really want this to change, you got to start pushing your management now to make compensation transparent and to make it very clear that when you're going in to negotiate, you're not telling them your current salary, because I guarantee you're making less money than the men are. And by the way, as somebody who's negotiated very aggressively on my salary, they hold it against you.
They do.
They hold it against you.
Yep.
So we're not the problem. The problem is the institution. So the only way it's going to really change is if we're bold enough to challenge the institution to change. So I'm just throwing that gauntlet down, and I hope the women in this room really listen to this as somebody who's got a lot of experience in this topic.
That's good. Yes, we talked about that before this panel as well. I think Lean In gave us all kind of an excuse to say, well, I read Lean In, so I know I can ask you about this. But we've also, definitely a couple of us had experienced being in a moment with and seeing gender disparity, pay disparity in a review process, where a female was pretty much, put in her place for asking for more money, and a man was, oh, I'm so glad you asked. And we saw it. We talked about that. And so it is something that is, it's systemic. It's sexism, and it exists. And we don't mean to victim blame, but it is something that I don't know how much transparency. I love salary transparency. I would let everyone know what everyone made in my organization. But a lot of people say that causes a lot more problems. We'll see. Maybe that can happen. I'm saying time, but we do have more questions. Can we keep going? What do we do? We're out of time. I'm so sorry. There are our Twitter tweets. Okay.
Connect with us.
Yes. Please connect with us, and we'll tweet our parting thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for staying, and thanks to our panelists.